Hello, students. You are welcome to the fourth topic of this course, Edu721, Psychology of Learning. In this topic, we are considering Gestalt theory or cognitive theory of learning. Recall that we said that Gestalt theory pays more attention to what goes on in the learner's mind and focuses on mental processes rather than observable behavior. Gestalt theory emphasizes learning by insight. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the principles and concepts of the theory. We will look at the laws of perception and the main ideas of insight learning. As we will also discuss the classroom implications of the theory. And also in this lesson, we're gonna be learning the Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains and consider the various ways in which we can structure our learning objectives in line with the various levels of these learning domains for the effectiveness of teaching and learning. Sit back and enjoy this lesson. Thank you. Yes, like I said, we're treating two subject matter today, Gestalt or cognitive field theory of learning, as well as Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains. What are the learning outcomes of this lesson? After completing this lesson, you will be able to explain the underlying principles of cognitive field theory of learning. You'll be able to describe the main ideas of learning by insight. You will be able to explain Gestalt laws of perception and discuss the classroom implications of the theory. Also, on the aspect of Bloom's taxonomy, we are going to explain the concepts in Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains and discuss how you would evaluate your students on the various levels of learning domains. So we start off with section A, that is the Gestalt or cognitive field theory of learning. Please note the pronunciation of that word, Gestalt. Gestalt. Yeah, what is the theory? What are the principles of this theory? And who formulated this theory? Gestalt or cognitive field theory of learning was formulated by a group of German psychologists. Notable among them were Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Kolle, all of who belong to Gestalt School of Psychology. Gestalt is a German word, which means pattern, shape, form, or configuration. We learn by seeing new patterns and by organizing them into a meaningful whole in the total situation. That is the belief of the theory. Therefore, the theory lays emphasis on cognitive structure and on perception of the total field by the individual. Don't worry if you don't understand it now. As we progress, the understanding will become clearer. Gestalt psychologists, that is this people I mentioned in the first point, Gestalt psychologists emphasize the importance of wholes over parts and believe that the whole of anything is greater than the sum of its parts. That is their belief. According to the theory, perception of a situation as a whole gives better understanding than the sum of its parts. Okay, so this could be illustrated with a car. When you look at a car, you look at the total assemblage of the component part of that car. If the whole is dismantled, through, though the components are there, it is no longer a car. You are just looking at the component car. You will not call it the component parts of the car. You won't call it the car a car. Of course, you can't drive each of those components as a car because you have dismantled, because they are dismantled parts. So this theory is trying to, the idea behind this theory is illustrative with that of a car that has been, that is seen as a whole. If the whole is dismantled, it is no longer to be called a car. Okay, they believe that parts are configured or organized to make complete or meaningful experiences or expressions. The theory is also named as learning by insight. Learning by insight. So let's look further on what this learning by insight is talking about. The Gestalt psychologists believe that learning occurs by insight. For instance, when we are faced with a problem, we try the much we can to get some clues in the ways that we should proceed to solve that problem. We think through it, we look at every aspect of that problem, and sometimes we don't make any headway. We don't make any progress in solving that problem. So sometimes it is normal that what we do sometimes is just to allow that problem be, or that difficult situation, we just leave it and then maybe do some other things to occupy our time. Then I'm sure you have found out that all of a sudden, there's usually a flash of understanding where you say, oh, aha, I can get this. If you get this flash of understanding in which we arrive at a solution to our problem. This sudden understanding of the components of a problem that makes the solution apparent is known as insight learning. Remember I said the theory, Gestalt theory or cognitive theory of learning pays more emphasis on what goes on in the mind of the learner, not the outward behavior. They lay more emphasis on what goes on in the minds of the learner and focus more on mental processes. So they are more into thinking, into the cognitive structure, how you are able to solve a problem using the thinking faculty, not just the outward behavior like the behaviorist. This flash of understanding that comes to you sometimes is often expressed as the aha moment. In that moment of having that sudden understanding of arriving at the solution to that problem, you will normally tend to express this aha, oh, aha, I now know the answer to this problem that I've been looking for. And I want to believe that some of us or all of us have at one time or the other experienced this sensation of the aha moments. Can you recall any one of such experiences? Yeah, you are actually illustrating the learning by insight. The Gestalt psychologists define learning as occurring through gaining of insight by understanding the relationships of various parts of a problem. In other words, learning comes as a result of mental activity, as a result of what is going on inside the mind of the learner. Okay. Yeah, these are some of the facts about learning by insight. Insight learning concerns itself with higher thinking skills. They don't believe in the connections between the stimulus and the response. They don't believe this theory is in contrast with the behaviorist learning, which places emphasis on the formation of stimulus response connections or the use of conditioning to change behavior. So their focus is on mental processes. They believe that all new ideas and concepts, inventions, and discoveries are the result of insight learning. All this wouldn't have taken place without insight learning. Of course, like insight learning concerns itself with higher thinking skills. And with that higher thinking skills, you are able to solve complex problems, which require higher learning. And solutions are reached only by application of insight. Insight learning is hinged on the fact that animals undergo a series of problem-solving approach following a sequence of principles and previous experience before arriving at a solution. Yeah, we'll soon look at the experiment conducted by Gestalt psychologists to illustrate this point about using previous experience, bringing it to bear in solving problems. Okay, the cognitive or mental processes of the animals are regarded as the yardstick in the development of insight learning, sure. Because they believe in the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, they believe that learning by insight requires full comprehension of the situation as a whole. You remember the illustration I gave about the whole car and when it is the component part of that car, when the car has been dismantled in its component part. So they believe that the whole of that car, the wholeness of that car is greater than the sum of the parts of that car. So let's look at the experiments in which they conducted to show the importance of learning by insight. In one of the experiments, as a matter of fact, they conducted several experiments. In one of those experiments, a chimpanzee called Sultan was put in a cage. In the cage was a stool and banana hung on top of the cage. Initially, the chimpanzee, or let's retain the name Sultan. Initially, Sultan made several unsuccessful attempts at reaching at those bananas. but he couldn't reach it. Then suddenly, Sultan decided to pull out the stool. Sultan noticed the stool inside that cage and decided to pull it out and climbed it to get the banana from where it was hung. This type of learning is called insight learning. If Sultan doesn't have that higher thinking skills, the idea of pulling out the stool wouldn't occur to him. The idea of pulling out that stool and climbing on it to get the banana, look at the series of attempts he made at arriving to the solution of that problem. Pulled out the stool, climbed on it to get the banana that was hung on top of the cage. Without a higher level of thinking skills, he couldn't have been able to do it. Probably if that Sultan is following, if Sultan were to follow the behaviorist type of learning, it would have waited for the banana to be brought to it to eat. But you can see the level of thinking that went into getting down those bunch of bananas. Okay, in another experiment that was conducted, Sultan was put in the cage with a banana and a stick lying outside the cage. It made a few attempts with its hands to get the banana, but could not. Then it noticed a stick lying outside. You see the thinking skill in action. It noticed the stick lying outside the cage. Picking up the stick, it successfully reached out and pulled in the banana. Yes, this wouldn't have been possible with the mechanical style of conditioning or stimulus response connection. It went out there, put in its thinking faculty, and was able to arrive at the solution to the problematic situation. So from this experiment, let's look at the main features of insight learning. Remember, we said Gestalt theory or cognitive theory of learning lays more emphasis on insight learning, on using the mental processes to solve problems. So let's look at the main features of insight learning. Let's use the experiment as for illustrative purposes. Look at some of them, I've highlighted them. Okay, arrangement of the problem situation. You can see that for that chimpanzee, for Sultan to be able to reach out and get those bananas, there were some, there are some arrangements, the essentials that will enable Sultan to solve that problem were arranged appropriately. You can see for the first experiment, the stool, the availability of the stool, and yes, the availability of this stool, that he perceived the stool and then felt that, oh, with this stool, I'll be able to reach out to those banana that was hung on the cage. So that stool, the appropriate things that was provided for it to reach out and get those bananas were the stool. That is for the first experiment. Without that stool, it wouldn't have been possible for Sultan to get the banana. So the same way for our learners in the classroom, if you're teaching them any content, you have to make sure that you provide the necessary essential things that will enable the students to solve whatever problem that they face in the classroom. Yeah, what about the learning situation? The nature of the situation is very important for insight learning. With insight, the organism tends to perceive a pattern of organization that helps in learning. It's almost like the first point, that is arranging the problem situation in a way that the child will perceive the component parts, all the component parts, so that the child will perceive the relationships among the component parts of that problem. Thereby, the insight will suddenly come to that child. From whole to part, yes. Like I said earlier on, they lay more emphasis on the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. The organism reacts to the whole situation, not to the component parts. Yeah, like the case of that chimpanzee, the name Sultan, like the case of Sultan, who perceived the total situation and knowing that, yes, with this stick, I will be able to draw in the bunch of banana that was placed outside the cage. So the Sultan didn't see the stick as a separate component of the total situation. He didn't see the banana as separate. He just noticed that, oh, with this stick, I can actually use it to draw in the banana. The same way with the stool, with the first experiment, the stool. So Sultan saw the connection between the stool, saw the relationship between what the stool can do to reach out to the bunch of banana that was placed on top of the cage. What about sudden awareness? Yes, there's always that aha moment. Aha, that moment when the solution suddenly comes to you. So we say insight is sudden. It appears as a sudden awareness. That's sudden awareness, sudden understanding of the solution to that problem. What about intelligence? Yes, you need some level of intelligence, higher level thinking skills. It plays an important factor, in insight learning. Okay. Past experience. Yes, past experience too is an important factor, is a main feature. It's another main feature of insight learning. Usually learners or as human beings, we like to draw on our past experiences to enable us solve any problem that we encounter. And then in the classroom situation, learning gained in one situation helps the learner to react insightfully in other identical situations. These are some of the main features of insight learning. Don't forget, insight learning is synonymous with Gestalt theory of learning or cognitive field theory of learning. We come to an important aspect of Gestalt theory, that is about perception. You will recall that I've mentioned the fact that the theory has to do with the total perception of the whole situation, of the whole problematic situation. Without perception, you can't perceive the relationships that connect each component of that problem and be able to see it as a whole. So perception is an important concept in Gestalt theory. They conducted most of their experiments in the field of perception and made significant contributions in showing how configuration of the stimuli in the environment can lead to easier perception. On the basis of the experiment they conducted, they developed the laws of perception. They include the law of figure-ground relationship, the law of proximity, the law of similarity, the law of continuity, and the law of closure. So let's look at this. Let's look at each of these laws in more detail. Yeah, the law of figure-ground relationship. Before I continue, just pause a while and look at this image on the right side of your screen. Look at this image. What do you notice there? What do you notice on this image or on this figure? So the law of figure-ground relationship states that there is a close relationship between figure and ground. Everything we perceive stands against a background. Yes, everything we perceive stands against a background. Our perceptual system will not let us see object against object. If you look at the image on the right side of your screen, there is only one image there, a pair of faces, and is standing against a background. Or you are looking at something that looks like a vase that is standing against a face. So it's like a dual image figure. We call this type of image a dual image figure. So the dual image figure is the vase and the face. There is only one object there. There are no two objects because object cannot stand against another object. You won't see it. Objects can only, figures, everything we perceive stands against a background. So figures or objects can only stand against a background, not with another object. So by looking at this image on the right, our perception can vary depending on what is perceived as figure and what is perceived as ground. If you are looking at the figure as a pair of faces, two, yeah, there are two there, the vase will automatically disappear. That's why you can't see two objects at the same time. The vase will disappear. Once you're focusing on looking at the pair of faces, the vase will disappear. Then, likewise, when you focus on the vase, the face disappears. Try it. The face disappears. You can't succeed if you try to look at both the face and the vase, because two objects can never be perceived at the same time. You can't perceive object against object. You can perceive object against a background. That's why it is called the figure-ground relationship. Okay. So let's look at the second law. Yeah, what can you see there? The second law is a law of proximity. This law states that things that are close to one another tend to be grouped together. Look at the image on the right side of the screen. Things that are grouped together, you can see the different yes, you can see the dots that are separated. You tend to group them. You tend to group them the way they are. You don't see them as a whole. You tend to see them as a group. They are in group of you don't see them as individual dots on the screen. You see them as a group. So what it is saying is that the elements closest to each other tend to form a group, as if they were one set. If you look at the first one on the left has as if they were one set. You can see them. You have 3 sets of dots there. The same way, learners in the classroom, when teachers, as a teacher, if you want to present your learning content to your learners, and you are using the blackboard to write, the chalkboard to write something on, don't separate your content. Similar content should appear together. In that way, it makes learning better, and that material will be able to be learned better. So the closer 2 or more things are together, the more they are learned and remembered. If you separate them, they will not be easily remembered. That is why revision soon after a learning process is essential. When you have learned something and you revise it almost immediately, you will tend to retain the materials that you have learned. So we go on to the 3rd law, that is the law of similarities. The law of similarity states that things that are alike tend to be grouped together. That is, similar words, ideas, numbers, and objects tend to associate in a group. Tend to associate in a group and easy to recall than dissimilar ones. The similarity can also occur in form of shape, color, shading, or other qualities. For instance, when watching a football game, we tend to group individuals based on the colors of their uniforms. You can easily tell from which club each person belongs to because of the similarities of their uniforms. For instance, when looking at the visual field in figure 3, that is the image on this screen, we likely perceive alternating rows of blue and yellow colors. You can see the blue colors, you can see the yellow colors longitudinally. That is, you are looking at them longitudinally. You can see the rows of blue colors and the rows of yellow colors as a group of blue colors and yellow colors. Thus, learning similar things is easier than learning dissimilar things, things that are not similar. Okay, so in classroom teaching too, we should apply the ideas of these principles in our classrooms. If the learning materials are presented in a well-organized manner with groupings of similar items, learners will perceive the materials better. Thus, learning similar things is better and easier than learning things that are not similar. So the similar materials, learning materials, should be put together, should be presented in a well-organized manner for easier learning. That's the essence of this law to our classroom situations. What about the 4th law? This law is the law of continuity, and the law suggests that we are more likely to perceive continuous, smooth flowing lines rather than broken lines. If you look at the image here, you are likely to perceive it as flowing lines. Yeah, even though they are presented in form of dot, but what comes to your mind is that it's like an X, it's like the letter X. So you see it as two lines that cross each other. You don't even, you see it as a straight line. You don't see them as an incomplete, as a dot, as a component. Remember the law, the theory of Gestalt or cognitive theory is about the whole being more better than the sum of its parts. If you are looking at this dots image, you will see them just as component parts. You won't, if you don't look at it as a whole, it wouldn't cross in your mind that it is a straight line. But what comes to your mind immediately, because in perception, you tend to continue straight lines at straight lines. It's that it is a straight line. You can see the two overlapping lines, rather than four lines. You don't even see them as four lines meeting in the center. You see them as two overlapping lines. That's a law of continuity. So the fifth law is the law of closure. What do you see in this image? Do you see something that looks like a circle, or you see the segments of a series of segments, series that are separated? What do you see mostly at a first glance of this image? Yeah, I'm sure you want to say yes. What you are saying is a circle, something like a circle. So what this law of closure means is that our perceptual pattern always tends to be complete with no loose ends. Yes, there are loose ends about, but because we tend to see the whole with the total situation, our perception when we are looking at something broken, circles like this, we tend to complete it. Our perceptual pattern is designed in a way that we tend to complete it as a circle. We don't see it as separate, as series of segments, different segments or gaps. You don't see, you can't see them as separated. Those gaps we tend to close up, and the image will become like a circle in your perception. When the perception of a situation is incomplete, the individual is not able to solve the problem that is driving it home now. When the perception of a situation is incomplete, the individual is not able to solve the problem. The problem is solved when he or she is able to bring the separate parts of the situation together into a closed perceptual figure, just like the image you're seeing here. Yeah, those are the details of the 5 laws of perception. Let's look at the classroom quickly, look at the classroom implications of Gestalt theory. The whole is greater than its part. Of course, we have explained that. Insight is related. Okay, for that first point, we said the whole is greater than its part. Hence, the teacher should present the subject matter as a whole to facilitate classroom learning. Okay, if for instance, you, the teacher, while teaching the topic, parts of a plant, the plant, you should endeavor to bring the plant and present it before the students. Let them feel the wholeness of that plant. And thereafter, the parts should be taken up. You can then teach the various parts of that plant. Even though the topic of that, what you want to teach them is parts of a plant, yeah, you should try to bring the whole plant. Bring a whole plant, may not be a very large plant, just you can, get some small plant. Let the student feel the wholeness of that plant. Let them see the whole plant feel it as a whole, because this process is going to facilitate insight learning. It's going to facilitate understanding of that subject matter. Doing so will enable learners to also develop understanding, better understanding about the subject matter. Second point, insight is related with higher form of learning. We have said that insight is related with higher form of learning. Therefore, the teacher should make use of problem-solving approach for better learning. You should encourage your students to discover the relationships of the elements that make up a problem. Don't just end up spoon-feeding your student with the answer. Let them present a problem, but make sure the essential elements that will aid understanding of that problem are presented, just like the stool and the stick, the long stick that Sultan, the chimpanzee, used in getting the bunch of banana. So make sure you present the essential elements that should help the students to arrive at the insight, to arrive at solving the problem through insight. Number 4, yes. Let the students discover concepts, meanings, and relationships on their own. Can also use the discovery method. These are strategies of teaching that you can adopt to foster the development of insight in students. As insight depends upon the previous experience of the learner, the teacher should be able to relate the previous experience of the learner to the new learning, bring up what they have learned before that is related to the new learning, so that the student will form a link between the previous experience and the new learning. This will make them learn better. The teacher should organize the learning situations in a manner that makes insight possible. I've mentioned this point, so that significant relationships emerge and understanding of the material results. Just like the case of Sultan, you organize the learning situations in a manner that makes insight possible. Without this tool, or the long stick, which Sultan used, insight wouldn't have been possible. So those things, those learning materials, you need your student to have, to build that, to develop the that idea of insight learning, to make insight possible, present them in the class. So I want to give you an activity. Look at this class activity. Explain any 4 future. Just pause your video a bit and then consider this. Attempt the class activity before you continue watching the video. Okay, so that marks the end of the first aspect of this lesson on Gestalt theory. In this section, you've learned the Gestalt theory of learning and how insight can take place. Teachers should endeavor to make constant use of the principles of this theory in their teaching learning activities. So with that, we go over to the second aspect of this lesson, that is the Bloom's taxonomy of learning domains. Benjamin Bloom developed 3 levels of educational activities for classifying learning outcomes or objectives. Some of us are already familiar with this concept. They are the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. The categories under each domain are arranged in increasing order, starting with from the simplest to the most complex one. Each domain included different stages. These stages assist the teacher in writing their learning objectives, in designing their learning activities, and preparing the assignment. Those are those areas that Bloom's taxonomy has been most significant in helping us write our objectives and design the learning activities and prepare our assessment, evaluation. Okay, so we are going to consider each of these learning domains. We said they are the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. Let's start off with the cognitive domain. The cognitive domain deals with knowledge acquisition. It deals with knowledge acquisition. Okay, and it emphasizes the development of mental or intellectual skills. There are 6 categories of this domain formed, and these categories are formed in a hierarchy from lower order to higher order thinking skills. These categories are knowledge, comprehension. We said they are formed in a hierarchy from lower order to higher order thinking skills. That means the lowest order is the knowledge, followed by comprehension, followed by application, and to higher order skills. The higher order skills include application, analysis, synthesis, and the highest being evaluation. The highest there is the evaluation. So what this means is that the first ones must be mastered before the next one can take place. You cannot understand a concept if you do not remember. Remember, that is remembering the knowledge level, that is the remembering level. Similarly, you cannot apply, that's the third one there, you cannot apply knowledge and concepts if you do not understand them, comprehension. You need to have comprehension of a concept before you can apply. First of all, you need to remember what you are learning. That's the knowledge level, is the lowest level of the 6 categories of this domain. You need to have the first one before the second one comes up. You need to have the second one before you can accomplish the third one, and so on and so forth, until you get to the higher order thinking skills. Okay, so let's take them one after the other. For the knowledge is the simplest learning outcome. That is your learning objective, is the simplest. It is expected that at the end of this learning task, a learner should be able to define. At this level, you are using such action verbs like define, identify, should be able to mention, should be able to describe, list, state, name, label. These are the action verbs that are used to describe this level of, at this level of knowledge. So normally we teachers, we state our learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, a teacher should be able to mention the categories of, or mention the 3 types of learning domains of Bloom's taxonomy. That's the lowest level. The person will just mention them. Oh, cognitive domain, there's affective domain, psychomotor domain. There is nothing like application there. You are not applying the knowledge. You are not using higher order thinking skills. You are not applying any of the higher order thinking skills. You are using the lowest level. Then the next level, comprehension. This is the second level in cognitive domain. It is this level that the learners learn to understand, understanding, comprehension. They learn to summarize, they can rewrite. These are the action verbs that are used in writing the learning objectives at this level. They can explain. Explain is another word. For instance, at the end of this lesson, students should be able to summarize all the 3 types of lesson domain. So for a student to be able to accomplish that, that student has shown comprehension. That student has shown understanding of that of the 3 types of the 3 learning domains. Yeah, if a student can summarize it, can explain it. So these are some of the action words or the verbs that are used in accomplishing this learning objective at the comprehension level. What about application? Hello, student, please, the details of this presentation can also be found in your lesson notes. They are uploaded on your course page. So to get a detailed description of these various categories of the cognitive domain, go to your course page, read the lesson notes. Is also uploaded there. So for application, at this level, you are expecting, you, the teacher, you are expecting the learners to be able to apply the knowledge they have gained into new task. You are applying, the students are expected to apply what they have learned in a new situation. And then the verbs that are used to describe this aspect, this category, include changing, operate. The student should be able to operate maybe something. The student should be able to manipulate. For instance, at the end of the lesson, a student should be able to apply the knowledge gained in the study of Bloom's taxonomy into the classroom situation. This is a typical example of how we can design our learning objective to reflect this category, the application category of this domain. What about the analysis category? The analysis category is the 4th stage in cognitive domain. It is the ability of the learners to distinguish between a fact, or can compare and contrast. It can differentiate between the facts that have been taught. So how do you set out the learning objectives? At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to differentiate between the cognitive domain and the affective domain. At this level, you know, the student, you are testing this stage of analysis. We are testing the 4th stage in cognitive domain. Then synthesis. Synthesis has to do with building or creating new tasks or new principles. Synthesis has to do with putting things together, putting different parts together to form a whole, with a purpose of, with a view to creating a new meaning out of what has been taught. So this level is also categorized as a higher order thinking skills. From application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, you need higher level thinking skills for it to manifest. So there are also certain verbs, action verbs you can use to reflect that in your learning objectives, when setting your learning objectives, when asking questions, because your learning objectives should be able to reflect in the type of questions you ask. You don't set a learning objective at the level of knowledge or comprehension, for instance, which are regarded as the lowest level. And then come and ask questions, come and evaluate students using application or using analysis, using this higher order thinking skills. It can work. Your learning objectives must synchronize with the type of evaluation you are using. If you are using knowledge and comprehension, let your evaluation remain at that. Limit your evaluation at that level. So synthesis, we've done that. So, and now evaluation. At this level, this is the ability of the learners to make judgment or pass comment about an event, about an information. At this level, you expect that your students should be able to defend, should be able to justify and relate what they have learned in a new situation. Justify, they can defend an action, defend a fact. So that is that. It is worthy to know that this cognitive domain has been revised. It has been revised to account for 21st century needs. The main change that occurred has to do with the use of verbs rather than nouns. For instance, look at the one we said: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. They are phrased in form of they were phrased in form of in noun form. Look at the new revised version, of the cognitive domain now. They include remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. What do you notice? That is, they are phrased in form of verbs, the use of verbs. Remembering, for knowledge. Well, maybe this slide will make it more clearer. Okay, look at the original and the revised taxonomies of the cognitive domain. Or we are just talking about the cognitive domain. Okay, the one on the left hand, that is Bloom's original taxonomy of the cognitive domain, the one we, okay, so knowledge is now at the bottom. That arrow there shows the direction of the hierarchy from lower order. It shows the direction. That's why, you know, when you are writing, you write from up, down. You don't write from bottom up, you write from top down. So because this is a diagram, that knowledge, remember, was the first one we considered. Comprehension, we said they are the lower order thinking skills. So here, that is why an arrow is used to show the direction of the hierarchy from lower order to higher order thinking skills. That this one on the left-hand side reflects the original, Bloom's original taxonomy. And then the one on the right-hand side reflects the revised taxonomy. You have remembering. I want you to juxtapose the two side by side: knowledge, remembering, comprehension, understanding, application, applying, analysis, analyzing, synthesis, evaluating, evaluation, creating. The only difference there, like I said, is the use of verbs instead of nouns. And then, rather than nouns, yes, for each of those categories, you can see. And then a rearrangement of the last two categories. Look at the last two categories here: synthesis, evaluation, the one on the left-hand side, synthesis, evaluation, and the one on the right-hand side, evaluation and creating. It was reversed. It was rearranged, you know. So the one on the left, evaluation, there was the last, but here on the right-hand side, second to the last, and they replaced synthesis with creating. So those are the revisions that were made on the cognitive domain. What about the affective domain? Quickly, affective domain. Affective domain involves our feeling, emotions, and attitudes. That's to do with why the cognitive domain has to do with the cognitive skills, knowledge. The affective domain describes how we deal with things emotionally, such as feelings, values, appreciation, attitudes, and motivation. The domain is divided into 5 hierarchical categories, with receiving at the lower end up to characterization at the top. So look at the receiving information or fact. These are the categories: responding to information, valuing, organization, characterization. Let me quickly just summarize what they are saying. Receiving information or fact involves passively, you are just paying attention, or you are just being aware of information being passed to you. You are just aware, you are just paying attention, passively paying attention. And then for responding to information, at this level, you become responsive to learning the task. It describes the willingness of the learners to respond to a given task. The willingness. At the first one, you are just receiving the information, and here you are becoming more responsive at receiving the information and responding to it. Then valuing. Valuing. This is the value a person attaches to a behavior. Value is based on the internalization of a set of values. You are internalizing the values contained in that information. Then organization. This is the process of organizing values into priorities in order to compare them and decide on the most appropriate ones. And then the last, the highest order there is characterization. You are at this level internalizing the values you have learned, internalizing it. So that is that about the affective domain. What about the psychomotor domain? Oh, there is an omission there. Maybe I would just, no, there's a wrong. Okay, there's an omission there. The psychomotor domain has to do with doing. Has to do with doing. This level of domain is about physical skills. It deals with physical movement and coordination of an individual. So it has to do with doing. And examples are like cycling, dancing, running, jumping. These are different types of psychomotor skills that the teacher can impact on students. Okay, there is also a class activity for you before I conclude this session. Explain the relationship between cognitive and affective domains of learning. Yes. Yeah, this section on Bloom's taxonomy is very significant in our teaching learning activities because they allow teachers to plan their teaching and what the goals, the objectives of the lesson will be. It is therefore very important that teachers are conversant with these domains or with these learning domains in Bloom's taxonomy. And we have to make sure that in setting our learning objectives, we have to focus on all three of the learning domains. You don't focus on one, focus on the cognitive and leave out the other two domains. You have to make sure that you incorporate all three of the learning domains in your learning objectives, in your assessment. So on that note, it's the end of the lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, and bye for now.